The year I stopped cooking Thanksgiving alone and let 6 o'clock do the talking. My name is Dorothy Callahan. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse, most of it in the cardiac unit at Mercy General in Cincinnati. And the one thing 3 decades of that work will teach you, the thing no textbook ever quite puts into words, is how to read a room, not the walls, the people inside them. Who is struggling and hiding it? Who is steady and who is one wrong word away from breaking? Who has decided something and just hasn't said it out loud yet? I did not expect to need that particular skill at my own son's Thanksgiving table. But here we are. 3 weeks before the holiday, my daughter-in-law sent me a list. 16 dishes, 22 confirmed guests, a note at the bottom that said, "Kitchen's all yours, Dorothy. You're so much better at this than any of us." I read it twice standing in my hallway in my bathrobe at 7 in the morning, and I want to tell you, I have sat with patients in their worst hours, held hands through things no family should have to face, and stayed calm through all of it. But something about that sentence, "Kitchen's all yours," made my chest do something I hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not anger, something quieter and colder than both. If this is your first time here, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe, and drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the moment I realized my daughter-in-law had made a very serious miscalculation. My husband Frank and I have been married 39 years. Before I tell you what happened to us, I want to tell you who he is. Frank spent his career as a high school history teacher and later a department head at Crestwood High in Clermont County. 33 years in the same building, same subject, different students who somehow all remembered him the same way. The teacher who made you feel like the past was still alive and had something to say to you personally. He coached junior varsity baseball for 11 of those years, not because anyone asked him to, but because the program needed someone and he was there. Frank is the kind of man who notices when the milk is low and replaces it before you notice it's gone. He is the kind of man who has never once, in 39 years, let me carry something heavy without reaching for it first. He is also, and I say this with complete love and complete clarity, someone who spent the better part of his life letting other people set the terms of things. Not because he was weak, because he was, at his core, a peacemaker. A man who believed most conflicts would dissolve if you just gave them enough time and enough grace. He was not wrong about most conflicts. He was wrong about this one. Our son, Nathan, is 36. He is a structural project manager for a commercial development firm in Columbus, which suits him because he has always been a person who thinks in systems, inputs, outputs, dependencies. I am proud of him the way a mother is proud when her child becomes, genuinely and specifically, himself. He is good at his job. He is careful with money. He calls on birthdays. He means well in all the ways that don't quite cover you when meaning well isn't the same as showing up. Nathan met Courtney 4 years ago and married her 18 months after that. The wedding was in September, outdoor venue, white and gold everything, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when someone has researched beauty and applied it with precision. I altered the hem of my own dress by hand the week before because Courtney had mentioned, just once in passing, that she thought cocktail length read more elegantly than floor length for mothers of the groom. I did not mention that I had already bought the dress and it was floor length. I just took it up 3 inches. That was me. I liked Courtney in the beginning. She was capable and direct, the kind of woman who walks into a room and knows immediately what needs to happen next. These are not small qualities. The issue, and it took me longer than it should have to name it clearly, was that Courtney's understanding of what needed to happen next frequently included what I needed to be doing. And the way she communicated these understandings left very little room for me to be anything other than accommodating. I noticed it early. I mentioned it to Frank once, about 8 months into their marriage. He told me I was perhaps reading into things. He wasn't wrong that I was protective, but I wasn't wrong about what I was seeing either. The patterns started small. They always do. Mother's Day, 14 months into the marriage. A Friday text from Courtney. "Hi, Dorothy. We're thinking a Sunday brunch thing at our place, Nathan's family, maybe 15 people. Would you be able to bring your quiche?" People love your quiche. Also maybe the fruit salad with the mint dressing. No question mark on the first ask. No, only if it's not too much on the second. I made the quiche. I made the fruit salad. I also made a coffee cake from a recipe my own mother had written on a note card in 1987 because I had heard Courtney mention once that she'd never had good coffee cake and believed it was a breakfast myth. That's me. I hear something and I think about it, and I do something about it quietly without making it a moment. Nobody mentioned the coffee cake at brunch. Courtney posted 4 photos from the morning on social media. The table looked lovely. None of the photos included the food. 6 months after that, Nathan and Courtney went to Portugal for 12 days. Courtney messaged Frank on a Thursday, not Nathan, Frank, asking if we'd be able to take their dog, Biscuit, starting that Saturday. A large, affectionate, deeply unstructured Labrador who required 2 walks a day and had a relationship with our back garden furniture that I can only describe as territorial. Frank said, of course. He didn't check with me first. I didn't say anything because the fight wasn't worth it, and I liked Biscuit despite myself. But I noted the Thursday to Saturday window, and I noted that it was Courtney who sent the message, not Nathan, and I noted that there was no "would you be able" in it, just "are you okay taking Biscuit?" Structured like a confirmation, not a request. I mentioned this to Frank that night. He said she probably just assumed, and that assuming is a kind of trust. I said there's a difference between trust and taking. He gave me the look he gives me when he has heard me and has decided to let it settle rather than engage it. I let it go. I should not have let it go. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, on a Thursday evening, I had just come in from a walk when my phone showed a message from Courtney. I stood in the front hall, still in my coat, and read it. Turkey, fresh, heritage breed if possible, Whole Foods usually has them. Cornbread dressing from scratch. Sweet potato casserole with the pecan crust. Green beans with almonds. Roasted Brussels sprouts. Cranberry relish fresh, not canned. Mashed potatoes enough for 22. Gravy from drippings. Parker House rolls homemade. Butternut squash soup for the starter. Pecan pie, pumpkin pie, apple galette, cheese board for when people arrive, sparkling cider for the kids' table. One more thing, Aunt Renata keeps kosher, so I'll need something separate for her. 16 items. Below the list, 22 confirmed. Probably start around 4 a.m. to have everything timed right. The kitchen is all yours, Dorothy. You're so much better at this than any of us. I stood in my hallway and read it twice. Then I sat down on the bench by the door, coat still on, and read it a 3rd time. Kitchen's all yours. Not our kitchen, not would you be comfortable asterisk, just a declaration. A work assignment delivered with a compliment tucked under its arm like it was doing me a favor. I set the phone face down on the bench and sat there for a moment. Frank came in from the kitchen. He looked at my face. What happened? I handed him the phone. He read it. He set it down on the bench beside me. He was quiet for a moment in the way he is quiet when he is deciding whether to say what he actually thinks. That's a lot, he said finally. It's not a lot, I said. It's everything. It's the entire meal for 22 people alone with a 4 a.m. start time. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to Nathan. Let me try first, I said. Let me give her the chance to hear it. I picked up the phone and typed back. That's a big list for one person, Courtney. Could we divide some of the dishes? Maybe you and Jess could take a few sides. Jess is Courtney's younger sister. She is capable, cheerful, and I have seen her cook, perfectly competent. Courtney's reply came in 4 minutes. Oh gosh, Dorothy, honestly, you make it look so easy. Jess is a disaster in the kitchen. Don't tell her I said that, lol, and I'll be running around managing everything else. You've got this. 3 exclamation points, the culinary equivalent of a pat on the head. I set the phone down. I did not reply, not yet. The following Sunday, Nathan had the family over for an informal dinner, ordered Thai food, nothing anyone had cooked. I've learned that about Courtney. She has never claimed to be the domestic type, and to her credit, she has never pretended otherwise. The performance was always reserved for other areas. After dinner, While Nathan was in the kitchen cleaning up takeout containers, I found a quiet moment beside Courtney on the back porch. I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving, I said. 16 dishes is a great deal for one person. I was thinking, what if we ordered the pies from that bakery on 5th Street, or did a potluck for the sides, spread it around a bit? Courtney turned to me with a smile that was warm on the surface and fully decided underneath. Dorothy, she touched my arm. You are the only person I know who can actually pull that off. Nobody else comes close. If we potluck it, it'll be a mess. You make it a dinner. There's literally nobody else. She said it like it was a compliment so enormous it canceled the request out. Like being told you're irreplaceable is the same as being asked. Across the yard, Nathan was laughing at something Frank had said. I looked at my son. I waited to see if he would look over. He didn't. I kept my face pleasant. On the drive home, I said to Frank, "That's not happening." He drove for a moment without answering. Then, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I am thinking that I have spent 31 years reading people in their hardest moments, and I know the difference between someone who doesn't realize what they're doing and someone who has simply decided not to." Frank was quiet. "And I am thinking," I said, "that I would like to spend Thanksgiving somewhere else." He looked at me at a red light. "Where?" I said Helen called last week. She's having a small dinner in Asheville, just close people. A cabin near the mountains. She asked if we wanted to come. Helen Marsh had been my closest friend since our second year at Mercy General. 30 years of shared overnight shifts, of knowing each other the way people do when they have seen each other exhausted and frightened and triumphant. She had retired to Asheville 3 years ago and called every Sunday. Frank said, "If that's what you want." I said, "I want you to tell me honestly whether you think I'm wrong." He was quiet for a block and a half. Then, "I think you've been right about this for longer than either of us let on." That was enough. That night, I called Helen from the bedroom while Frank sat at the kitchen table. When I came out 25 minutes later, something had settled in me. That particular quality of calm that comes after a decision stops being a question and becomes a fact. I sat down across from Frank. I put my hands flat on the table. Helen has a cabin reserved through the weekend. Her daughter and son-in-law are coming. Small, quiet, mountain air, real food made by people who want to make it. Frank said, "Tell me about the food." I said braised short ribs, roasted root vegetables, homemade bread, a pie from a local bakery in the actual mountains of North Carolina. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "When do we leave?" I pulled the notepad across the table. I wrote 4 sentences, folded the paper once and set it aside. Then I opened my laptop, found 2 seats on the 6:10 a.m. flight out of Cincinnati on Thanksgiving morning, direct to Asheville. Frank watched me. I looked up. He nodded once. I pressed confirm. The texts kept arriving all week. Tuesday, just a reminder, heritage breed turkey really does taste different. Worth the extra trip to Whole Foods. Thursday, hey Dorothy, for the rolls, can you do a pull-apart style? I saw a version on a cooking account I follow and it photographs really well. Saturday, also the Brussels sprouts. Could you do them with pancetta? I know it's an extra step, but it just elevates everything. Elevates, that was the word. I showed Frank the Saturday text. He read it without expression. Pancetta, asterisk, he said. For 22 people, asterisk, I said. From scratch. At 4 in the morning. He set the phone down carefully on the counter, the way a person sets something down when they are choosing their words. She's not planning a family Thanksgiving, he said. I looked at him. She's producing something, he said, and she's decided you're the production crew. I had been thinking the same thing since Tuesday. Because that same week, I had run into my neighbor Carol, whose husband worked in commercial development in the same industry as Nathan. Carol had mentioned, casually, that she'd heard Nathan's firm was going through a leadership restructuring, that his director position was, as she put it, asterisk not exactly guaranteed going forward, that there were a few senior partners who mattered enormously right now. I asked Courtney, in a Thursday text, who some of the guests were. She replied within minutes. Oh, mix of family and some of Nathan's work people. His division head Thomas Abernethy and his wife are coming, super important, very food-forward people. So excited for them to experience your cooking. Super important, food-forward. There it was. This wasn't Thanksgiving. This was a performance. A professional audition hosted in a family home, catered by my hands, designed to make Courtney look like a woman who produces extraordinary things effortlessly. Because the person actually producing the extraordinary things would be invisible in the kitchen by 4 in the morning. I replied to each text that week with one word. Okay. Frank asked me once if that was wise. I said, I'm not interested in arguing with someone who isn't listening. I'm just making sure she hears nothing to suggest otherwise. He looked at me for a moment. He had been married to me for 39 years. He understood what that meant. The boarding passes were printed and sitting on the kitchen counter in an envelope next to the car keys. 2 passes. Seats 7A and 7B, 6 and 10 in the morning. We were already gone in every way that counted. 8 days before Thanksgiving, I drove to Nathan and Courtney's to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed for a church supper in October. Simple errand, 10 minutes. I let myself in. They'd given me a key, and I heard Courtney on the phone upstairs. I set the dish on the counter and started to leave. Thomas and Miriam are definitely coming, and the Hargrove couple from the Portland office. Courtney's voice, easy and certain. Nathan's been really stressed about the restructuring thing, so I just thought, if I can get the right people in the right atmosphere and the food is absolutely spectacular, you know how that works. Mom is handling the whole meal, so that part's covered. I just need to focus on the experience. Mom is handling the whole meal. That part's covered. I stood in their kitchen for a moment, very still. In cardiac nursing, we have a term for the moment when a reading that looked stable suddenly shows you what was actually happening underneath. The moment the monitor tells the truth the patient had been hiding. You don't panic. You note it. You act. I walked back to my car, drove home, and sat at the kitchen table with my coat on. Frank came in from the living room. He looked at my face and sat down. I told him. He was quiet for a full minute. She doesn't think we'll go, I said. She thinks I'll be there at 4 in the morning because I've always been there. Then, Frank said quietly, Thanksgiving is going to be a significant education. 6 days before Thanksgiving, Frank called Nathan. I had asked him to wait, but Frank had reached a point, I could see it in him, where waiting was its own form of participation. Nathan picked up on the second ring. Frank kept it simple, the way he did when a situation had moved past discussion and into fact-stating. Nathan, your mother has been handed 16 dishes for 22 people with no help and a 4 a.m. start time. She told you it was too much. You didn't act on that. I need you to fix it. I listened from the hallway. A pause. Then Nathan's voice, careful, conciliatory. Dad, I hear you, but Courtney's already got everything planned and… Nathan, Frank's voice, patient, final. Your mother is not a catering service for your wife's business dinner. I'm telling you plainly so that it doesn't surprise you. Fix it. Another pause. Dad, I really think if you just, I love you, okay? I love you too, Frank said. Good night. He hung up. He came into the hallway where I was standing. We looked at each other. He's not ready yet, Frank said. He will be, I said. I walked to the bedroom, pulled my suitcase down from the closet shelf, and set it on the bed. And I began to pack. Before I tell you what happened Thanksgiving morning, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone you love make a choice you knew was going to cost them, and had to let it happen anyway because it was the only way they were going to learn it? Drop a comment if you know that feeling, because what happens next is the part that changed everything. The night before Thanksgiving, after I'd finished packing, I came back to the kitchen. Frank was at the table. The notepad was in front of him. He had unfolded the 4 sentences I'd written days ago and smoothed them flat with his palm. I sat down across from him and read them with him. Nathan, we love you. That is not the question, and it never will be. But I cannot cook Thanksgiving dinner for 22 people alone. I said so, and no one heard me. We're going to see Helen. We'll be home Sunday. The kitchen is yours. Love, Mom. Frank had added and Dad at the bottom in his handwriting. I hadn't asked him to. He had done it the same way he refills the milk, quietly, without ceremony, because it needed doing. He placed the note in the center of the kitchen table. I took the small ceramic bowl we kept on the windowsill, the blue one, the one Nathan had made in a middle school art class and given me for Christmas the year he was 12, and set it on top of the note as a weight. We stood in the kitchen together for a moment, the light on, the house quiet. We're going to hear about this, I said. Yes, Frank said. Nathan is going to be upset. Yes. I looked at him across 39 years of mornings and difficult conversations, and all the small, ordinary things that turn out, in the end, to be the whole of a life. You ready? He said. I've been ready, I said, since the day she sent the pancetta text. He laughed, the real kind from the chest. I turned off the kitchen light. We called the car together, standing in the hallway, side by side, and waited. The driver didn't ask what brought two people to the airport at 4:15 in the morning on Thanksgiving. He had the heat up and an easy radio station playing. Frank sat beside me in the back seat, and I looked out the window at the dark Ohio streets and felt something I recognized from my nursing years, the particular steadiness that comes when you've made the right call in a hard moment, and you know it before the outcome confirms it. Cincinnati arrivals at 4:45 in the morning have their own atmosphere, not empty, suspended, like the city is between versions of itself. Frank bought us both coffees from a cart near security. They were improbably good. We drank them slowly. My phone had 4 unread messages from Courtney, roll reminders, a note about the turkey thawing, an ingredient question. I did not open them. Frank looked at my screen. I turned it face down. At 6, they called our boarding group. I thought, right now, 22 people believe there is a Thanksgiving dinner being assembled for them. In a few hours, someone is going to walk into a kitchen and find a note under a blue ceramic bowl. Frank's phone buzzed as we reached the jetway. Nathan, hey, coming to pick you both up at 7. Courtney wants Mom there by 8 to get started. See you soon. He didn't know yet. Frank put his phone in his jacket pocket without responding. We found our seats. 7A and 7B, I took the window. The plane pushed back at 6:18, 8 minutes late, which felt, somehow, exactly right. When the wheels left the ground, Frank reached across and put his hand over mine. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Helen Marsh was waiting at Asheville arrivals with a thermos of real coffee and the completely unshocked expression of a woman who has known me for 30 years and was not even slightly surprised. She hugged me first, long and without commentary. Then she looked at Frank. Frank, you actually came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought Dorothy might reconsider in the car. She considered, Frank said, for about 4 seconds. 3, I said. Helen laughed and handed us the coffee. We drove toward the mountains with the windows cracked. The air was different from Cincinnati air in the specific way mountain air in November is different, cold, but not punishing, carrying something green and woody underneath the chill. After 30-some years of Ohio Novembers, it felt like a different arrangement of the world. Helen's cabin was up a winding road through trees that had held some of their color, gold and amber, the last of it, not yet surrendered. A wooden porch. A stone fireplace already going inside. A large orange cat named Ferdinand who assessed our arrival with professional detachment from the arm of a chair. We took our coffees to the porch. My phone lit up on the table. Nathan, then Courtney, then Nathan again, then a number I recognized as Courtney's sister, Jess. Frank turned it face down. Helen looked at the phone, then at me. It'll keep going for a while, she said. I know, I said. It'll stop when it stops. She handed me more coffee. I looked out at the trees and thought, somewhere in Columbus right now, there is a kitchen with a note in it and 16 dishes that no one is making. And here I am on a mountain porch with my husband, watching the morning come through the trees, drinking actual good coffee. Some reckonings have to happen on their own time. You just have to be somewhere else when they do. Here is what I was told afterward, in pieces, over several days. At 7:58 in the morning, Courtney came downstairs in a new apron she had ordered specifically for the morning, white linen with a subtle pattern, the kind that photographs well in natural light. She had planned a photo for her social media. The warm kitchen, the organized chaos of serious cooking already underway, the impression of effortless abundance. The kitchen was dark. Cold. No Dorothy, no Frank, no turkey on the counter, no smell of anything, no sound except the refrigerator. Just the table, and on it a blue ceramic bowl, and under it a folded piece of notepad paper. Courtney picked it up, read it, set it down, picked it up again. Nathan came downstairs 2 minutes later and found her standing at the table holding the note, motionless. He read it. He told me later he stood there for 30 full seconds without speaking. Then he called my cell. No answer. Called Frank. No answer. Tried the house line. Sent 3 texts. Called Jess. Jess arrived at 8:20 still in her coat. "Courtney, do you know how to cook a turkey?" Courtney looked at her. "I've never cooked a turkey, Jess." Jess's boyfriend Marcus offered to find a tutorial. Nobody responded to this. Meanwhile, 22 people had confirmed. Thomas Abernethy and his wife Miriam had RSVP'd within an hour of receiving the invitation. The centerpiece flowers had been delivered the day before. The linen tablecloth was pressed and folded on the dining room chair. In Asheville, I was watching a chickadee on the porch railing. By 9 o'clock, Courtney had called 5 restaurants. The first had stopped taking Thanksgiving orders in September. The second could do a packaged dinner but needed 48 hours' notice. The third had a wait list of 112. The fourth didn't answer. The fifth, a farm-to-table place she'd bookmarked 3 months ago with the specific thought that it was the kind of place Thomas Abernethy would recognize the name of, was fully booked. Dining only, no takeout, no exceptions. She hung up without saying goodbye. Nathan drove to the grocery store at 9:40. The fresh turkey section, fully stocked 2 weeks ago, held 5 frozen birds and 2 that had been returned, still frozen. The largest available fresh option weighed 11 pounds. Not enough. He stood in the aisle for 4 minutes. He came home with 3 rotisserie chickens from the deli, a box of instant stuffing, a bag of frozen dinner rolls, a pre-made pecan pie, a pumpkin pie in a plastic clamshell with a crack along the edge of the crust, a wedge of aged cheddar, and a box of water crackers, because he had remembered at the last second something about a cheese board. Jess attempted the sweet potato casserole from a recipe on her phone. She didn't have enough brown sugar and substituted honey, which changed the texture, which she discovered only after it came out of the oven. The kitchen smelled like burned edges and good intentions. At 1:15, guests began arriving. Thomas Abernethy and his wife Miriam came in at precisely 1:45. He wore a sport coat. She brought a bottle of wine and handed it to Courtney at the door with a smile that was gracious and completely unreadable. The table was genuinely beautiful. Courtney had real skill with arrangement, the linens, the amber candle holders, the small gathered greenery at each end. She had cared about how it looked, and it showed. Whatever else was true, that was true. Then the food arrived. 3 rotisserie chickens on her good serving platters, instant stuffing with a slightly gluey consistency, frozen rolls still cool in the center. Jess's sweet potato situation, which tasted fine but looked uncertain. The pecan pie on a cake stand. The pumpkin pie, clamshell nowhere visible, its former home faintly suggested by the way the crust had settled. Miriam Abernethy looked at the table, set her wine glass down gently, said nothing. Courtney said, smiling, "We had a last-minute change of plans with family. These things happen." Thomas nodded and said, "Of course." In the kitchen, Nathan stood at the counter with his back to the room, looking at the wall. He had known it was too much. He had heard his mother say it twice, plainly, without drama. He had watched his father call and say it a third time. He had chosen, each time, the path of least resistance. He had told himself it would work out. Looking at 3 Kroger rotisserie chickens on his wife's good china, he understood, not as an idea, but in his body, the way things finally land when they stop glancing off the surface, what it will work out had actually cost. On the back porch of Helen's cabin, the short ribs had been braising since morning, and the whole mountain air smelled like something deeply right. Helen's daughter Clara and her husband were there, easy company, the kind of people who tell good stories and don't require anything from you. We ate at 3 in the afternoon, gathered around a table on the porch with the mountain light going amber behind the ridge. Real food made by people who wanted to make it for people they wanted to share it with. I was in the middle of a story about a particularly memorable night shift from my 3rd year at Mercy General when my phone lit up on the table. Courtney. I looked at it, looked at Frank, looked at Helen. Helen looked at her short ribs. I picked up. Dorothy, her voice was high and tight, words arriving close together. Where are you? Do you understand what is happening here right now? Thomas Abernethy is sitting at my table. There is nothing ready. You could have called me. You could have at least said something. I set my fork down. I looked out at the ridge line. Courtney, I said. The voice I learned in a hospital hallway when a family needed truth and couldn't quite hold it yet. Clear, unhurried, finished performing. I told you I couldn't do it alone. I said it 3 weeks ago. I said it at Sunday dinner. Frank called Nathan directly. No one responded to any of it, so we made other plans. A silence. That is incredibly selfish, she said. We'll be home Sunday, I said. I hope the rest of your evening is pleasant. I hung up. Helen refilled her wine without being asked. 18 seconds later, my phone rang. Nathan. I answered. He didn't speak immediately. I could hear him outside, the muffled sound of the party behind a closed door, then just wind and the background of a yard. Mom. His voice had changed. The managed, careful tone was gone. What was underneath it was younger. The sound of someone who has stopped performing and started feeling. I don't really know what to say. You don't have to say everything right now, I said. I knew it was too much. I told myself you'd be fine with it because you're always fine with it, and I didn't want to fight. I chose not to have the fight, and I made that your problem. He stopped. I'm sorry, Mom. Tell Dad I'm sorry. I believed him. Nathan had never been dishonest with me. He had made the easier choice consistently until the easier choice ran out of road. That's a failure of courage, not of character. There's a distance between those two things, and I had made the same failure myself more than once in this story, in the months before I finally said no, actually. He came to it honestly. I know, I said. We'll talk properly when we're home. Go take care of your guests. A pause. Is the food good? I looked at my plate. The short rib, falling apart, fragrant. The roasted vegetables. The bread Helen had made from a recipe her grandmother had written down in 1962. Frank across the table from me, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in 3 weeks, laughing at something Clara had said, the mountain light behind him going soft. It's wonderful, I said. Helen made her grandmother's short ribs. A pause. Good, Nathan said quietly. Good, Mom. I said, Sunday. Helen's grandmother's short ribs were everything she'd promised. Braised low and slow with red wine and herbs, the kind of cooking that turns patience into flavor. We ate until we didn't need to anymore. We talked the way old friends talk when there's no agenda, circular and warm, doubling back on old stories, finding new angles on things we thought we'd already fully understood. The mountain dark came down early and clean. No city diffusion, just stars appearing in sequence like they were remembering their places. Frank and I sat on the porch after dinner with blankets and the last of the wine, and didn't talk about Columbus or Nathan or any of it for a full hour. We talked about a trip we'd half planned to Portugal years ago and never taken. We talked about whether Ferdinand the cat had made a decision about us or was still deliberating. We talked about a book Frank had been reading. It was the best evening I'd had in longer than I wanted to calculate. Nathan told us the rest in pieces over the following week. Thomas Abernethy stayed 2 hours and 40 minutes. He was courteous throughout, the kind of man who maintains his conduct independent of circumstances, which is its own form of professional information. He ate the rotisserie chicken without comment. He complimented the centerpiece sincerely, which it deserved. As he was leaving, Miriam said to Nathan quietly, "Your parents usually cook, I imagine." Nathan said they'd had a prior commitment that couldn't be moved. Courtney, from across the room, said there'd been a last-minute change. The two explanations didn't align by about 40 degrees. Jess, from the end of the table, had been quiet most of the evening. As Courtney walked Thomas and Miriam to the door, Jess looked at Nathan and said, simply and without raising her voice, she should have asked them properly. She then went back to her plate. Guests left by 5, earlier than a real Thanksgiving ends. Earlier than it would have ended with a kitchen that had been running since 4 in the morning, with the warmth that builds in a house where someone has been cooking in it all day and is glad to be there. Nathan did the dishes. He told me it was the first time he'd washed up after a large family meal. I sat with that for a moment before I responded. While he was at the sink, Courtney came in and said he should have called us more. He turned off the water. "I did call them," he said. "I called Dad directly. They told me it was too much. I didn't do anything about it." A silence. "You knew," she said. "Yeah, asterisk," he said. "I knew." He turned the water back on. Courtney left the kitchen. She did not post any photos that evening. Not the table before dinner, though she'd taken several. Not the centerpiece, which would have been genuinely lovely. They stayed in her camera roll. Nathan told me this without editorial comment, but I noted it. Thomas Abernethy's next message to Nathan was a routine Tuesday note about a project document. He did not mention Thanksgiving. That was the whole of it. We flew home Sunday afternoon. Ohio in late November received us exactly as expected, low gray sky, cold that had decided to stay. The particular flatness of coming back to familiar ground after 4 days of mountains. Our car turned into the driveway, and Nathan was sitting on the front steps. Not a phone call ahead, not a text, just there, having driven 45 minutes to sit on our steps in the cold. That told me what I needed to know. He stood when I came up the walk. We looked at each other. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who has been honest with themselves about something and hasn't been sleeping well since. "Courtney didn't come," he said. "That's all right," I said. We went inside. Frank had the kettle on before his coat was off. The 3 of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the note had been 4 days ago, the same chairs, the same kitchen where 30-plus years of our family's meals had happened. Nathan said, "I knew it was too much. I knew it when she sent the list. I told myself you'd manage because you always manage, and I used that as an excuse to not do anything. I let her treat you like a service. And I told myself I was staying out of it, but staying out of it was its own choice." He stopped. "It wasn't okay." "No, asterisk," I said. "It wasn't." He looked at me. He'd been expecting more scaffolding around it. I didn't have any to offer. Frank put his hand on the table between us. "We love you, Nathan. That is completely unconditional. But we are not invisible, and we will not agree to be." Nathan looked at his father. "I hear you." "Good," Frank said. I poured the tea. We sat there for a while without filling the silence. It was the kind of quiet that exists only after something true has been said and actually landed, not deflected, not reframed, not smoothed over. The quiet that belongs to a real conversation between people who have stopped performing for each other. It was the best 40 minutes we'd had together in 2 years. Nathan showing up without calling, that stayed with me. The moment a person stops explaining themselves and simply appears, that is a different kind of communication, the kind that requires nothing back. Courtney called on Monday. I answered. "I want you to know," she said, "that what you did was really hurtful to me. I had people here who mattered, and you put me in an incredibly embarrassing position." "Courtney," I said, "I understand that it felt that way. And I want you to understand that when someone sends you 16 dishes and a 4 a.m. start time and calls it a family invitation, that's also hurtful. We can talk about this honestly, or we can leave it where it is. Your choice." A silence. She hung up. She called back 3 days later. This time she talked less and asked more. She asked how Asheville was. She said the mountains sounded beautiful. She said she'd been thinking. She did not apologize in those exact words. But she asked questions, 3 of them. Genuine ones about what I'd thought, how I'd felt, what I wished had happened differently. That was the first time in 2 years she had done that without an agenda attached to the end of it. I recognized it for what it was, not resolution, not transformation, but an opening. The small rearrangement that happens when an assumption is removed from a relationship, and both people have to figure out how to stand without it. Frank and I talked to her for 11 minutes that call, longer than we'd spoken without a task involved in longer than I could remember. There was no grand reckoning, no scene where everyone wept and pledged to be different people and meant it permanently and it held. That is not how people actually change. What changed was more structural than that. An assumption had been removed. The assumption that our time, our labor, our willingness were resources available on demand, indefinitely, without asking. Without that assumption, things had to be negotiated. And negotiation requires that everyone involved be treated as a person with actual choices. That was enough to begin with. Nathan started calling differently, questions instead of updates. How are you both doing, not what are you doing? Small shifts that accumulated. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, Wednesday mornings, 9 to 11. I'd been wanting to for 2 years and kept setting it aside because there was always something else first, something someone else needed, something that felt more urgent than a thing I simply wanted. Frank booked Asheville again for April. Helen was already planning a hike. One Saturday morning a few weeks after we got back, I made a real breakfast, not elaborate, just eggs and good toast and fresh orange juice, and Frank sat at the counter while I cooked, and we talked about nothing that mattered. Old stories. A film we'd seen in 1994 and still disagreed about. Whether Ferdinand the cat had ultimately approved of us. I stood at that counter in my own kitchen on a Saturday morning with nowhere to be, cooking for the 2 of us, and I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be, not the performance, not the production. This, the ordinary, unobserved, completely sufficient thing. About 2 weeks after we returned, I was going through a box of old photographs from the hall closet. Frank sat down beside me at the kitchen table, and we opened it together. The archaeology of a shared life, birthday parties from the early 90s. Nathan at age 8 in a Halloween costume he'd designed himself and been fiercely proud of. A photograph from Frank's last year of teaching, his classroom, the students arranged around him for a final day picture, all of them grinning. Near the bottom, I found a photograph from Thanksgiving. Maybe 7 years ago, based on the curtains before we repainted. I was at the stove. Frank was standing behind me with his arms easy around my shoulders, his chin tilted toward my hair. We were both laughing. I didn't remember the moment. I didn't remember who had taken the picture. But I remembered the feeling of it, not just being in the kitchen, but being in it, the 2 of us inside the same ordinary afternoon with no distance between us. That was the thing. That was what Courtney had miscalculated, fundamentally, when she decided the kitchen was mine. Not the labor. The company. The 39 years of standing next to each other inside the unremarkable hours of a life. You don't send someone you love a work order. You show up. I found a small frame in the junk drawer, put the photograph in it, set it on the kitchen shelf next to the blue ceramic bowl. We stood looking at it for a moment. We should have gone to Asheville years ago, Frank said. We were exactly where we were supposed to be, I said, until we weren't. He looked at me. That's unexpectedly philosophical for a Saturday. I'm a deep woman, Frank. He laughed, the real kind. And I thought that is what the 39 years were for, Not to produce Thanksgiving dinners for professional networking events. Not to be leveraged. Not to be available. To produce this. The two of us in our kitchen on a Saturday with nowhere to be, laughing at something small. That right there. If you've ever been handed a list instead of an invitation, this story is for you. You do not owe anyone an explanation for the absence they never noticed when you were present. Here is my question for you. Have you ever said no to something that terrified you, and then felt, the moment you said it, that it was the only right answer? Tell me in the comments. And if you're sitting with something right now, choosing between staying quiet and finally speaking, I hope Dorothy and Frank's Thanksgiving helped you make up your mind. There are more stories like this one below. We'll see you there.